The day my husband died began like any other. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden light through the curtains of our bedroom. I remember the quiet hum of the coffee maker, and the faint scent of lavender from the candle he always lit on the nightstand. He had been my anchor, my heart, my home. And in one cruel instant, that anchor was ripped away. The phone call came mid-morning. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, but the words themselves shattered me. "Mom, I'm afraid your husband has passed, died, gone." I felt as though the floor had fallen away beneath me. My knees buckled, my hands trembled, and a cold, hollow numbness settled deep inside my chest. It wasn't just grief, it was disbelief, a choking, suffocating disbelief that he, the man who had loved me fiercely for 20 years, could be gone. Friends and family arrived later that day, offering their condolences in soft murmurs. They brought casseroles, flowers, and whispered words that felt like they belonged to someone else. I nodded politely, smiled weakly, but their gestures barely penetrated the fog of pain surrounding me. I wanted nothing more than to curl into the bed we had shared for decades and disappear. And yet, the betrayal came from the one person I never could have anticipated. Our daughter, Emily. Emily had always been bright, ambitious, and fiercely independent, but lately she had grown distant, her smiles strained, her conversations clipped. Now, standing over me, her face a mask of cold practicality, she said words I'll never forget. "Mom, the house is mine now, and so is the money, 33 million. Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. Surely grief had warped my perception. But no, the venom in her voice was real. She didn't even pause for a heartbeat, didn't offer an apology or a consoling word. She had already claimed her inheritance in her mind, and apparently in her heart, leaving me to scatter like ashes in the wind. I stared at her, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and heartbreak paralyzing me. My own daughter, the child I had nurtured, the one I had stayed up nights worrying over, the one I had dreamed would stand by me when the world fell apart, was casting me aside like an old coat, worn and unwanted. I wanted to scream, to beg, to cry. But instead, I sat there silently, the weight of her betrayal pressing down harder than any grief I had felt for my husband. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, as if the very house we had built together, the life we had carefully constructed over decades, had become a prison of humiliation. And yet, amidst the storm of loss and disbelief, a tiny ember of clarity flickered. My husband had always been fair, thoughtful, deliberate. He had spoken often of leaving things in order, of protecting me no matter what. Could it be possible that he had prepared for this? That beneath Emily's triumphant cruelty, there was some safeguard my husband had quietly woven into his will? I didn't know the answer yet, but that thought, fragile as it was, offered the first glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't entirely helpless. Maybe the man I had loved so dearly had left me a chance to reclaim not just what was mine, but my dignity. I left the house that evening with only a small bag of essentials, my heart heavy but my mind slowly beginning to turn. I didn't know where I would go, where I could find refuge from the coldness of my own child, but I knew one thing. I would not disappear quietly, not yet, because even in the face of unimaginable loss, the heart remembers how to fight, and I had only just begun. The night I left my home, the city felt impossibly vast, cold, and indifferent. I wandered through streets I had once walked with my husband, places where laughter and warmth had existed, now shadowed by the hollow ache of betrayal. Every corner seemed to whisper Emily's words, repeating them with a cruelty that made my chest tighten. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." I tried to tell myself that she didn't know what she was saying, that grief and greed had warped her mind. But as the hours passed, as I sat on benches in dimly lit parks and leaned against the walls of cafes, where the staff offered polite but distant concern, I realized this was no childish tantrum. She truly believed I was dispensable, that the years of love, care, and sacrifice I had poured into our family meant nothing in her eyes. Sleeping was impossible. I spent nights in motels, each one a stark, sterile space, the fluorescent lights harsh against my bruised emotions. I didn't cry every night, though the tears came in torrents sometimes, unbidden, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. I felt unmoored, untethered from the life I had built. I was adrift, yet somewhere in the depths of despair, a quiet resolve began to grow. I remembered the evenings spent with my husband in our study, watching him pore over documents, letters, and legal papers. He had always said, "One day, all this will matter, even when we're gone." At the time, I thought he meant it in the simple sense of inheritance or finances. Now I realized he might have meant something deeper. A hidden protection, a way to shield me from the very cruelty I was experiencing. But understanding that possibility was not the same as having a path forward. For days, I drifted from place to place, eating minimally, conserving money, and avoiding people who might ask questions. My pride was as wounded as my heart. Asking for help felt like admitting failure, and yet every step, every sleepless night, forced me to confront a truth I had tried to ignore. I could not survive purely on grief. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to reclaim what had been stolen from me, not just in money or property, but in dignity. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that I finally contacted our family lawyer. I framed it as a cautious inquiry, pretending to seek guidance for my future, while carefully masking the storm of emotions inside me. The lawyer's voice on the phone was familiar and calm, a reminder of stability in a world that had gone mad. Yet even he couldn't hide the faint undertone of amusement when I asked him whether the will had any clauses my daughter might have overlooked. I held my breath as he chuckled lightly. "Did you even read the will?" he asked, almost teasing. His laughter, though light, carried the weight of a secret. I didn't understand its meaning yet, but I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps my husband had indeed left instructions, subtleties that protected me in ways Emily would never suspect. Meanwhile, Emily continued to parade around in the illusion of her victory. I heard rumors from neighbors and distant relatives. She had begun redecorating the house extravagantly, purchasing luxury items, flaunting her newfound wealth with a smug sense of entitlement. Every mention of her extravagance felt like salt on an open wound, yet it also fueled my determination. I realized that she was careless, that her arrogance might be her undoing. I began keeping notes, small observations about her behavior, her weaknesses, and her arrogance. Every word she spoke, every careless action, became a puzzle piece in a strategy I wasn't yet ready to reveal. Beneath my despair, a plan was forming, quiet but resolute, a way to turn the tide. Even in the darkest nights, I began to sense that my husband's wisdom and love were guiding me. I wasn't as helpless as Emily believed. She might have thought she had won, but the real battle, the one for justice, dignity, and revenge, had only just begun. And as I finally lay down on another unfamiliar bed, staring at the sterile ceiling of a motel room, I whispered to the empty room, "You'll see, Emily. You have no idea what you've started." The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and old leather, a comforting reminder of the life I had temporarily lost. I stepped inside cautiously, heart pounding, trying to mask the storm of emotions that had been building over the past week. Emily's cruel words still echoed in my mind, but they no longer had the same paralyzing power. Now there was curiosity mingled with a cautious hope. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, greeted me with a warm smile, though his eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement that I could not immediately place. He gestured toward a chair across from his massive oak desk, where piles of papers and neatly organized folders awaited. I sat fidgeting slightly, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice calm. "How have you been holding up?" I swallowed hard, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "I've been managing," I replied, the single word carrying the weight of all I had endured. He nodded knowingly, then leaned back in his chair. "I think it's time we discussed the will." His tone was casual, almost teasing, but there was an undeniable gravity beneath it. "I assume you've spoken with Emily since the reading." I shook my head, bitter laughter escaping my throat. She kicked me out. Said I was useless now, that I should find somewhere else to die. Mr. Hargrove raised his eyebrows slightly, hiding a smirk behind his hand. "Ah, that sounds familiar. She's always had a flair for dramatics, hasn't she?" I felt a flicker of anger, but also a flicker of anticipation. "What does that have to do with the will?" I asked sharply. "Everything," he said, leaning forward, his hands steepled. "Did you actually read it?" I blinked. I thought I did, but..." He chuckled softly, a sound that made my pulse quicken. "Well, that's the problem. Most people only glance at the pages, focusing on the numbers, the houses, the bank accounts. But your husband, he was meticulous. He didn't just leave you assets. He left instructions, conditions, protections, things most people would overlook." Emily, in her excitement, ignored them completely. My stomach tightened. "Protections," I whispered. "Yes," Hargrove said, opening a folder and sliding it across the desk toward me. "Your husband wanted to ensure you were never truly without security. But he also wanted to teach certain lessons, particularly about greed and entitlement. The clause here," he pointed to a highlighted section of the will, "states that while Emily technically inherits the house and the sum, she must fulfill several obligations before she can take full control, and if she fails, the inheritance reverts to you." I blinked, my heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and sudden hope. "She can't just kick me out." "Not legally," Mr. Hargrove said, smiling faintly. "Her misunderstanding, or perhaps her arrogance, has put her in a precarious position. She thought she could claim everything immediately, but she overlooked the conditions your husband set, conditions that he crafted with the foresight of a man who knew you might need protection. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, triumphant smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. For the first time since Emily's betrayal, I felt a surge of power, not the flashy, material kind, but the deep, unshakable satisfaction that comes from knowing the truth is on your side. She's going to be furious, I murmured, my mind racing with possibilities. Indeed, Mr. Hargrove said, closing the folder, but the key here is patience. You don't need to confront her immediately. Let her make mistakes, let her underestimate you. Your husband's foresight has given you the advantage. The law, in this case, is on your side. I nodded slowly, a spark of something I hadn't felt in days, anticipation. Revenge, yes, but tempered with the elegance of justice. Emily thought she had won, thought she had silenced me, humiliated me. But she had failed to read the fine print, failed to understand that my husband had always been one step ahead. I left the office that day feeling lighter, my grief momentarily tempered by a rush of determination. I would reclaim my life, piece by piece, and in doing so, I would show Emily the consequences of her cruelty. For the first time since my husband's death, I smiled, not a fragile, polite smile, but one of quiet, deliberate power. The game had changed, and I held the advantage. The first time I saw Emily after the lawyer's revelation, she was lounging in the living room of the house she thought she had claimed completely. The walls gleamed with freshly painted colors, furniture gleamed with polish, and the scent of expensive perfumes lingered in the air. Everything screamed triumph, her triumph. But I saw through it, through the facade of victory. I saw vulnerability and carelessness, the cracks she had revealed without even knowing it. I entered the house quietly, letting the soft click of the front door echo in the silence. Emily looked up, startled, her perfectly manicured hands frozen in mid-air, the picture of innocence shattered in a single instant. Mom, she whispered, her voice tight, uncertain. Yes, Emily, I said, my tone calm, deliberate, and for the first time in weeks, free from the tremor of despair. It's me. Her eyes darted nervously toward the expensive sofa, toward the priceless decorations she had flaunted, as if seeking protection from the sudden realization that she was no longer in control. I thought you were gone, she stammered. I smiled faintly. I was never gone. I was just underestimated. Emily's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks as a creeping panic settled over her features. What do you mean? I walked slowly toward her, each step measured, deliberate. Do you remember Dad's will? I asked softly, letting the words hang in the air like a blade. You claimed you'd read it, that you understood it fully, but you didn't. You missed something. Something very important. Her breath caught. I don't understand. I stopped just short of the sofa, letting the tension build. You thought you had won everything, Emily. The house, the money, your triumph over me. But you failed to meet the conditions your father set. You assumed greed would be enough. But it isn't. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, perhaps to call the lawyer or some ally, but I gently placed a hand on the arm of the sofa, stopping her. Don't bother, I said softly. It's already too late. The inheritance, everything you thought was yours outright, is contingent, and you failed. Emily sank into the sofa, her posture shrinking, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling under the weight of her own hubris. No, this can't be, she whispered. Yes, it can, I said, my voice both soft and firm. Your father made sure I would be protected. He made sure that, even if you tried to cast me aside, the truth would eventually come to light. And now it has. Tears welled in her eyes, not just of fear but of shame, the first genuine emotion I had ever seen her display in years. She realized that the world she had built on arrogance and cruelty was nothing more than a house of cards, and it had begun to collapse. I didn't shout. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't gloat beyond the quiet satisfaction that comes from justice finally being served. Instead, I let the law speak for itself, letting her see the consequences of entitlement and betrayal. By the time the lawyer arrived later that week to formalize the legal adjustments, Emily was pale, quiet, and resigned. She could no longer ignore the conditions her father had set. The inheritance, once hers in her mind, was now mine to control. I watched her sit across from me, a mixture of regret and humiliation in her eyes, and felt a peace I hadn't known in weeks. The house, the money, the years of betrayal, all were secondary to the most important victory: my dignity, my self-respect, and the quiet triumph of having endured, planned, and emerged stronger. That evening, alone in the study my husband had loved so dearly, I allowed myself a deep breath, the kind that releases the weight of months of grief and fear. I looked at the old photographs, the letters, the small reminders of a life that had been torn apart and painstakingly rebuilt. I smiled, a real smile this time, not the fragile kind worn for appearances. Emily's arrogance had faltered, the cruel words she had spoken were silenced by truth, and I had reclaimed not just my inheritance, but my power. In the end, it wasn't about money or property. It was about justice, about being seen, being heard, and being remembered. I had survived the betrayal, the grief, and the cruelty, and in surviving I had won in ways that mattered far more than any sum of money. As the night settled around me, I whispered a quiet thanks to my husband, to the wisdom he had left behind. The chapter of betrayal had closed, and a new chapter, one of strength, dignity, and quiet, hard-won triumph, was just beginning.